I spent 31 years building the Accord's resettlement system from the inside. Forms, ratios, intake quotas, species code registers, transit manifests, with 17 required fields and 3 optional ones that nobody ever filled in correctly. I wrote 2 of the procedural manuals myself. I trained the officers who trained the officers who process the filings now. When I retired, they gave me a citation and a small crystal plaque that I used as a doorstop until it broke. I went back to work 6 months later, because I did not know how to be useless. The Orvith Station processing bay at Carroll Transit Junction was short-staffed and short-funded, and I was willing to volunteer 3 mornings a week. They gave me an intake desk, a headset that worked only if I held the left ear cup with 2 fingers, and a stack of manifests that smelled like they had been stored next to engine coolant. I did not mind any of it. The work was familiar. I understood the shape of it. The morning I found her, I came in early because the previous night's transit run had logged a cargo discrepancy, and someone needed to walk the bay before the authority's compliance officer arrived at 8. The bay was quiet. Cold, the way transit bays always are before the heat exchangers cycle up, that particular cold that gets into your joints and stays there. I walked the numbered bays with a handheld scanner and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm before I finished making it. Bays 1 through 11, palletized containers, sealed and tagged. Bay 12. A stack of empty return crates, logged out. Bay 13. 1 crate, not empty. She was sitting inside it with her knees pulled up against her chest and a folded piece of paper held in both hands, as if she had been told not to let go of it under any circumstances. She was small, genuinely small, smaller than the crates we used for compressed gas cylinders, and she had the pale silver-blue skin of the Velhari, and the large dark eyes, and the delicate ridged ears, and she looked up at me without alarm. Not calm, exactly. More like she had used up whatever she had for fear, and what was left was a quiet, waiting patience. I crouched down to her level. I said, in the 3 words of Velhari I possessed, that it was all right. She looked at me steadily, then she held the paper out. I took it. It was dense with Velhari script, the kind I could not read. Not the trading lane pictographs, but the formal registration script, small and precise. The page was folded into quarters, and the creases were worn through from being opened and refolded many times. I did not know what it said. I folded it back and held it carefully, because she was watching me hold it. I scanned the manifest discrepancy report for the night's run. The transit crew had logged out at 0341. The manifest listed her bay as cargo. Compressed atmospheric supply, 3 units. Returned empty. Nothing else. No passenger addendum, no unregistered occupant notation, no species or age flag, no authorization code. She did not appear anywhere on any document associated with that flight, which meant, in the language of the Accord's Resettlement Authority, that she did not exist. I understood the system well enough to know what that meant in practice. A child without a transit origin, without a species code logged at point of departure, without a sponsoring authority, she could not be entered into the intake register, because the intake register required a valid origin field, and without that field the form could not be submitted, and without a submitted form there was no case file, and without a case file the resettlement pathway could not begin. The system was not designed to be cruel, it was designed to be complete. It simply had not been designed for her. I went back to my desk, I sat down, I opened the intake system, and I stared at the origin field for a long time. Then I began to fill it in. I gave her a transit origin from a processing waypoint that I knew processed high volumes of Velhari refugees and kept records in a format that the authorities' system could not cross-reference in fewer than 8 months. I gave her a species code. I gave her a case number drawn from a block of reserve numbers I had allocated personally during my tenure and had never fully assigned. I built her a file that looked, to every automated check in the system, like a child who had come through proper channels and had simply been separated from her documentation in transit, which happened, legitimately, often enough that there was an entire secondary intake pathway for it. I knew what I was doing. I had written the protocols that the auditors used to detect exactly what I was doing. The compliance officer arrived at 8. I walked him through the cargo discrepancy report, which was a legitimate clerical error in the weight log, and we resolved it in 20 minutes, and he left satisfied. The child sat in the side room off the intake bay with a blanket and a portion of the breakfast I had brought from the staff kitchen, and she ate with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to assume there would be more. The paper stayed folded in my jacket pocket. The authority's regional supervisor called me at 10:30. Someone in the overnight data sync had flagged an anomaly in the reserve case number block. It was not the 8 months I had estimated. It was 14 hours. I told him I had processed an unregistered child found in the intake bay, using the secondary transit pathway, and that the documentation would be fully completed by end of day. He told me that the secondary transit pathway required a certifying authority code from a licensed transit sponsor, and I did not hold a license in my current volunteer capacity, and therefore any file I had opened was procedurally void. I told him the child was sitting 10 feet from me. He told me the child could not be formally present at the station without a valid intake file. We went around it twice more. It did not change. He sent 2 authority officers in the early afternoon. They were not unkind. I want to say that plainly, because it is true. They were doing their work. They spoke to the child in careful trading lane Velhari, the simple kind, and she went with them without resistance. At the door she stopped and turned and looked at me. I gave her back the paper. She tucked it inside her robe and held it against her chest with both arms. The way you hold something you have been told matters, even if you do not know yet exactly how. Then she was gone. My file was voided. The case number was returned to the reserve block. The compliance record noted a procedural error in volunteer intake processing, resolved without penalty, officer counseled. They were generous about it, given what I had actually done. I was removed from my volunteer assignment the following week. Conflict of interest with active case management, they said. I did not argue. I had known the cost before I opened the intake form. 3 months later, I received a letter from a colonial archivist at the University of Corell's Displaced Communities Registry. She had been given a paper by an authority officer, a paper that had passed through several hands before anyone thought to have it translated. The archivist wanted to know if I was the Marin Solis listed in the voided intake record, because the paper was a sealed Velhari family registration document, the formal kind, filed with the Velhari Homeworld Authority 23 years ago and certified again 5 years later. The homeworld in question had been destroyed 12 years ago. The registration listed 4 members of a family unit. 3 of them were marked deceased in a supplementary notation that someone had added in a different ink, careful and small. The 4th entry, the youngest, listed by name and born mark, was annotated with a single Velhari word that the archivist translated for me: surviving. The archivist wanted to know if I had any information about where the child had been transferred after the authority took her. I did not. The transfer record was not accessible to me. I wrote back and told her what I knew, which was the date, the bay number, the folded paper, and the way the child had held it against her chest at the door. I do not know what happened after that. I have looked, carefully, within the limits of what I can still access. The trail goes where trails like that go, into the authorities' closed resettlement files. Behind a wall, I cannot get through without credentials I no longer hold. I kept the archivist's letter. It sits in the same drawer as the broken plaque. 31 years I spent building the system. I understood it well enough to know that it was not designed for her. Not because anyone intended that, but because the people who built it, myself included, had not imagined her. Had not imagined that something whole and surviving and carrying its own documentation could arrive without a valid origin field and still be real. I think about the paper, the way it was folded and refolded until the creases were nearly transparent. Whoever gave it to her told her to hold on to it, told her it mattered, told her, I think, that someone on the other end of that paper would know what to do. I knew what to do, I did it wrong, and then I did not get to finish it. I hope the archivist found her. I hope someone with the right credentials, and a clear case number, and all 17 fields correctly completed, found her, and put her somewhere she could keep the paper without having to hold it so hard. That is the most I know how to hope for. It has not stopped being enough to get out of bed in the morning. I count that as something.